We can go ahead and get started. This meeting is being recorded. I started the recording a few seconds ago and will be posted on our website, as are the other advisory group meetings and the community meetings. You can find them all there. My name is Tim Kutz. For those of you joining from the public who have not yet been introduced to this study, I'm from the Fairfax County Department of Transportation, and this is the West Falls Church Active Transportation Study. I have a few other staff members from FCDOT on as well, as some members of our technical group. We have VDOT present, FCPD, Parks, among others, and we'll go through introductions in just a minute. But first, I'd like to go over the agenda. We go to the next slide. So this is our 5th advisory group meeting. We just had our second session of community meetings, or second set of community meetings, I should say, recently, and now we've kind of come to the point where we're needing to discuss the priorities. We've got a whole host of recommendations. We have the results of the survey, so a bulk of this meeting will be discussing those results and how to look at those and use some of the other tools that we've provided along the course of this study to narrow down the priorities and put those forward as a result of the final report. And I'll talk about what that might look like in the discussion of next steps. But first, we have our technical group Q&A. So I mentioned in an email a couple weeks ago that we're going to have members of the technical group on to answer questions. And some of you have provided those questions in advance, so thank you for that. But certainly if you have additional questions that you've kind of thought up in the meantime, feel free to ask those. We're going to make sure there's enough time to get those folks involved in the study and get any clarifications you might need in the first part of the meeting. So without further ado, I'm going to go over the list as I see it. First name I see, we have Alex Fogerty. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, hi, Alex Fogerty with VDOT Land Development Section.
Thank you, Alex. And next up, we have Beth Ionetta.
Hi, good evening. My name is Beth Ionetta, and I'm the Trails Coordinator with the Fairfax County Park Authority.
Thank you, Beth. We have Reg Veray.
Afternoon, Reg Veray from Virginia Tech Transportation student. Thank you.
Thanks, Reg. We have Officer Brian Rochefort.
Hi, sir. Good evening. Yeah, Brian Rochefort, Traffic Safety Division, the VDOT Liaison Officer.
Thank you. And finally, we have Sid Siddiqui.
This is Sid Siddiqui, and I'm with the Land Development Section, VDOT.
Thank you, Sid. I was expecting somebody from FCPS. Do we have anybody from schools on the call? Okay, anybody else from the technical group that I might have missed?
We have Peter from Fairfax DPWS.
Oh, sorry, Peter, go ahead.
Peter Vigliotti, Fairfax County Department of Public Works and Environmental Services, Maintenance Stormwater Branch Chief.
All right, thanks, Peter. Okay, so we'll get right into it. Thanks to those of you from the technical group that are here tonight. Again, we'd actually hope for a couple more folks to join us. I know WMATA had said that they were going to join as well, but the questions that were sent to me, we'll follow up with those groups that aren't present today and get answers to those. So Cheryl, you had sent in several questions. Mark Kiefer had sent in a couple other questions. I'll paraphrase those, but feel free to correct me if I've misstated anything. We'll just kind of start from the top here and get the appropriate folks involved in answering these. But Cheryl, your first question was directed to FCPD. You had a couple of them. First was Officer Rochefort, if you can answer this one.
Back to you.
Sorry, did somebody else join? Maybe
You're
not
good. I
unrings.
think, yeah, I think you're okay. Somebody mute.
Okay. First question was explain how you set the enforcement schedules and priorities based on responses to taxpayers' requests. So taxpayer comes in with a request for enforcement. How does that play into the way you set priorities and your enforcement schedules? And Cheryl, again, if I need to clarify any of these, please jump in.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Let me clarify right off the bat. The question arises from the fact that when we in our neighborhoods raise issues about speeding, right turn on reds, et cetera, with VDOT, with you guys, and with Supervisor Faust's office, they often say, hey, you've got an enforcement problem. This isn't anything that we can address. And so a number of us have reached out repeatedly to our McLean district station to request some enforcement issues. So we really want to know what are the priorities in setting enforcement. We've seen very little enforcement since the pandemic, and it's quite noticeable that there's been a drop off. So we'd like to know, rather than be told things like we can't pull cars over safely on these roads when they've been pulled over safely for years, how are you setting the enforcement priorities? And what should we do when we feel, frankly, that we're being blown off? Thank you.
Yeah, I can answer that. Let me give you a little quick background of myself, though, because I'm in the Traffic Safety Division out of Operations Support Bureau. So I'm not in the patrol station like McLean per se, but I used to work in Sully for 10 years, and 6 of those years I was in what's called the Special Enforcement Team. And that addresses exactly what you're asking, is our set teams on the station levels are traffic officers. Right? Since the pandemic, the problem is our staffing has gone down a lot. So not one station right now that I know of has a set team anymore. So on the station level, there's no traffic officers that are designated solely for traffic. And that's solely because of staffing issues. So let me just say, before the staffing issue, maybe a year ago, every station had traffic officers. So when you would call in a complaint and say, hey, there's a lot of speeding on Chainbridge Road, those officers, the set team, would put it on their radar, and they would go out, throughout the weeks and stuff, and hammer down and write tickets in those areas, put out their signboards, the message boards, the radar trailers. Right now, we don't have any station doing that. It's because of staffing, though. So when your complaint comes in now, the commanders get them, they push them out to the patrol supervisors, and the patrol supervisors, push it out to the officers, and they, in between their normal calls for service, then they try to do traffic stuff. So the problem being right now is because of staffing, there's no set team to do it. Like I used to do, I wrote myself 2,000 tickets a year just as me. There's no officers doing that right now because there's no teams to do that. Motors is out of my bureau, Operations Support Bureau. So those are the only traffic guys technically right now. But they're always doing escorts, other projects. They're still required to write a bunch of tickets because that's their main function. So they're hitting each district, but not as much as they used to. I think in one of your questions, I was reading the questions, you asked for some of the stats, and this is not good. You're not going to like it, but this is the truth, so I don't mind telling you. In 2019, that I guess because someone asked about Westmoreland Road, Great Falls, and Haycock. In 2019, we wrote 623 tickets on Westmoreland Road. 2021, there's only been 67. So the pandemic did take a hit from officers because we were not pulling as many cars over because of fear of the sickness and stuff. But now that's gone. But the problem now is staffing. Every station still will push out the request to the officers. It's just, do they have time on their own to go do it? Because there's no specialty team. When you ask what could be done, like when you're not getting response, I would still continue to call our captains and say, hey, we need traffic teams. We need these officers. I think Sully district. McLean, I just spoke to the crime analyst lady. She's the one who gave me all the stats for the tickets for those three roads. They don't have a set team. So McLean used to have the best set team. You guys had a 4-officer set team who were out there constantly. But now they don't have anyone. So the crime analyst asked me, because I put out those radar boards sometimes from OSB, but I'm one person for the whole county. The stations have the ability to do it. They just don't have anyone doing them right now. And the lady I spoke to over there, the officer, she didn't even know that they had those signboards because the team has been dissolved. I mean, that's the biggest problem we're having right now is manpower and resources. So I do agree, enforcement is necessary. We're just not having the manpower at the moment.
Thank you for that very honest answer, as disturbing as it is, because here we are doing this active transportation study, and the biggest threat to pedestrians and bicyclists are in fact vehicles. And right now there is total impunity on our roads. I watched at Westmoreland and Haycock just this afternoon a near rear end collision of a woman who stopped for the red light, and the car behind her somehow thought she was going to run the red light so it could run through. So I really think Jane and Ben and Aria, that we need to get our supervisors involved in pressing for more traffic enforcement. All of us who walk, whether we have kids, whether we have dogs, whether we have elderly friends, are literally one step away from having a tragedy here, similar to the tragedy that happened in Oakton. So I really appreciate your honesty, Peter. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. Did you have any more questions for FCPD? I think they were all covered. Unfortunately,
excuse me, I think they were covered, but I wonder if after advisory group members have a chance to ask questions, if you could let some of the members of the public who might want to ask a question for FCPD do so that sure, our FCPD folks don't have to stay to the end of the meeting. If you could accommodate that, I'd appreciate it.
Certainly, yeah. If anybody else from the public has a question for FCPD, we'll go ahead and take those now, and then after that we can let Officer Rochert go. Adrian White, you have one? I've just enabled your mic, so you should be able to unmute now.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Gotcha.
Oh, great. I think Cheryl, in asking her question, really asked mine as well. The brazenness of drivers in our area, and I'll include the area that's within the perimeters of this active transportation study. The brazenness in breaking the law, traffic laws, is alarming. On Great Falls Street, which intersects with my street, the speed limit is 35 miles an hour. We would like to see that lowered. I have asked and I have been told no. And yet many jurisdictions around us, as well as in the country, are lowering residential speed limits. And I think it's important to lower the speed limits on these narrow roads. Much of Great Falls Street is narrow, and some of Haycock Road is narrow, so that when people see a speed limit of 35, they figure they can get away with 45 or 50. They leave me in the dust when I'm going 35. And I'd like to see, because of the reason Cheryl stated, the biggest danger to bicyclists and pedestrians is an automobile or a truck. And there was a wonderful letter to the Falls Church News Press this week, citing statistics on how long it takes at 20 versus 25 versus 30 miles an hour for a car to stop. And it's alarming when you think about the fact that we have speeders on Great Falls Street, on Haycock Road, and on Westmoreland where there are schools. 3, in fact, because Temple Road Def Shalom does have a school, that we can't get speed cameras. I believe the state authorized them in a recent General Assembly session, and I'd like to know how we can get them. Because if we don't have the manpower, the person power, to have the police enforce the speed limit, what can we do to get speed cameras?
I can answer a little bit of that because in a recent meeting I was in, they brought that up also for Sutton Road where the children were just killed a couple weeks ago.
I
Same
used to
thing
live over
going.
there.
Yeah, I mean that's a bad area. I think the way they explained it, because my captain at my Operations Support Bureau is working on that right now with one of the supervisors. I think the way the state law is written right now, we can only put them in school zones. They
Right.
have to change
School and
legislation.
construction.
Yes, yeah. So right now we don't have any. Fairfax City has a couple. They're working on getting one over there by Sutton. So that would be something you should address with your supervisor in the McLean district and see if they can add that to the list, because they have to get legislation written for it. As far as lowering the speed limits, that's a VDOT thing because the police department, they'll ask us if we'd sign off on it, but they do their own surveys and studies and then they make the recommendations. So that would be something for VDOT.
Yes, and VDOT came back when we've asked to have the speed limits lowered on various streets and said things like, well, no one's been killed there yet, or we don't have a record of accidents. And I think that's a poor excuse. I'd like to see realistic speed limits, particularly as we talk about implementing active transportation measures that are designed to protect pedestrians and bicyclists, wheelchair users, etc. One of the best things we can do is stop those conflicts with vehicles. And one way to do that is with speed cameras. The city of Falls Church, which controls their own roads, has them, quite a few of them actually. I know people who've been penalized for either running red lights or speeding in the city of Falls Church. We should have the same capabilities, and I think we should exercise the ones that the General Assembly has already given us. For example, in school zones, and that's Westmoreland in the area near Sherrill.
Right. Arya, it looked like you had your hand raised. You wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in on the speed camera piece because with Supervisor Palchik's office, that's been something that's come up quite a bit and something she has been pushing for in regards to the crash in Oakton that killed 2 people, and it's something that even in the near fatal death from 2 years ago that happened on Blake Lane is something that they've been continually working on. As of now, our understanding is that the legislation, not only as was noted, requires it to be within a specific distance of school zones and construction zones. But there is a plan right now to bring speed cameras to Fairfax County. Though right now it looks like it's going to be a pilot program first, where each district will be able to start with a speed camera in a location. And we're still a little bit out, and we're working right now separately to try to get more details as to where the county is with that, because that's something many of the supervisors have been eager to be able to implement. But because the enabling legislation was only done relatively recently, the pilot just hasn't been totally set up yet. But the plan is for speed cameras to be able to be put in my understanding as of now is starting with 1 per district, and that will be something to be able to help control speeds in certain places. So supervisors will work with transportation teams and our police officers to figure out where the best places are going to be able to be to have that assist in the traffic enforcement. So that's where they are as of now, and our office, and I'm sure the Drainsville office as well, will be happy to give updates as that moves forward.
Thank you.
Tim, can we also call on the VDOT people to kind of address the speed?
Yep. Sid, Alex, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I can chime in on that. I mean, Sid and I are in the land development section, not in traffic engineering per se. We mostly deal with, private developments and land use issues. However, as I mentioned perhaps before in this meeting, artificial reduction of speed limits are not going to change, are not going to help much. The way we come up with these speed limits on these streets is at 85th percentile. We determine the 85th percentile speed, which is the speed limit that 85% of drivers are comfortable driving at or below, or at or above that. So basically, even if we put a sign for 25 miles per hour or anything lower than 35, and people are comfortable with going 35, it's not going to do anything unless you enforce it. And we just heard the issues that we have with enforcement and all, and perhaps the cameras would help. But all I'm saying is that the way we come up with these speed limits is going through the 85th percentile. This is the speed that most people are comfortable driving at. So that's how it's been determined. Artificially reducing the speed is not going to help much unless it's enforced. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Looks like we have a question from Kathy Pippin.
I'm working on the microphone. Kathy, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi there. Thank you so much. What about those displays, the speed displays? And some of them flash when it gets above certain speed. Is that possible? What does it take to put some of those around Haycock, Westmoreland, for the time being, at least?
Yeah, this is Officer Roachford again. Yes, we have those. Me, out of Operations Support Bureau, I have 2 of those. Every station has 1, but again, the set teams put them out. Now, some of the crime analysts at each station have taken it up upon their responsibility, since the set teams have been dissolved and pushed back into patrol, that they will put them out. Other stations have assigned officers to do it. So like say for McLean District, if you want it on Westmoreland, you have to make a request to the station, and then whoever I don't know at at McLean, except that the crime analyst I spoke to recently said that they don't have someone doing it. She may be wrong. You just have to make the request to the station and they'll put them out, but they have to rotate them because there's only one. They're like $4,000, I think. So they put one at, like I out of Operations Support Bureau will get requests from some other station to say, hey, can you help us out and do this? Or VDOT, a lot of times, since I'm the VDOT liaison, they will request it and say, hey, we're getting citizen complaints about this road. Is there any way you could put out the radar board? And I'll put it out, but I have to rotate them through multiple roads throughout the county, and each station will do the same thing. So it never hurts to make the request. If your station doesn't do it, contact our Operations Support Bureau. It's a traffic division, and you can make that request, and I can put it on the list. But again, I only have 2, and then I have to spread them out throughout the county. And I've gotten requests from county supervisors, their staff members, and say, hey, can you put this on this road? And I'll go out and put it out. The batteries only last like 6 days, and then I have to replace them.
And so for the permanent boards, is that a request that VDOT would handle then?
For what report?
So the permanent signage.
Yeah, the permanent ones, that's totally VDOT. That's not us. Yeah, we only put the ones that I mount them to the poles. Like since that fatality on Blake Lane, Fair Oaks has been putting one out. They don't have a set team, but their crime prevention officer, I keep saying crime analyst, the crime prevention officer has been putting theirs out, and I went and put 2 more out. So we've been rotating them on that road for like the last week or so, but they die, obviously, and we have to change the batteries. But those permanent ones, those are through VDOT. I'll let VDOT speak on that, but it's hard to get those because they're not cheap either. Then it comes down to funding.
May I just add something quickly? And I probably mentioned that in the one of the past calls, but on Haycock from Great Falls Road heading to Haycock School, there's a little dip or hill or incline there, and you know, a lot of people cross there, and it was about maybe now 2.5 months, maybe 3 months ago that one of my sons almost got hit. It's really, really sad and frustrating to see what does it take. Does it take for my son to be hit for us to be able to do something to us for you know, people, grown-ups to be hit, pets. So I'm just wanted to voice that again. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more questions for Officer Rochefort? If not, we can let him go for the evening. Looks like
Hold on,
one more hand
Adrian.
was raised.
Yeah, I'll get Adrian. Adrian, you should be able to unmute yourself again.
I think I'm unmuted. I just wanted to comment on the speeds at which 85% of people feel comfortable. I worked for the Federal Highway Administration, and my field study on gap and lag acceptance was published in the Journal of Public Roads. And astounded at the gaps and lags that people felt comfortable pulling out into on public roads. I think that speaks to the 85% figure, because if you look at 85% of the people who feel comfortable speeding on the roads that we're discussing, you'll find that it's way above the speed limit. I was astounded by the results of the study I did, and that proved to me that that's an arbitrary figure, and I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Officer Rochefort, we appreciate your time. If you do want to jump off now, I think that was all the questions the AG and the public had for you. So really appreciate you taking the time out of your night to join us. Oh,
we have another
sorry,
one.
Michael, you go ahead. No, you're muted, Mike.
Okay, sorry about that. Officer Rochefort, I appreciate your time. I think this comes down to, I guess, fundamentally just coverage. And basically, you know, you said it was a staffing issue. Can you just elaborate on that? Like, did we have did the county, did the area have a bunch of police officers, you know, take early retirement or what have you? I just want to understand, when you're saying it's a staffing issue, did people leave the force? Did they move away? You know, are you guys looking to hire more? Because I hear all of the speed camera, I hear all of the other suggestions, but if it comes down to manpower, I guess, what are we doing, or what is the county doing to backfill that? Is this just an unfortunate kind of time where we're just short, I don't know, 10 officers, 15 officers, but they're aggressively hiring, so hopefully next year we're kind of back to the pre-COVID enforcement regime, if you will? And, you know, some of the folks on the call and the video calls, concerns might be addressed somewhat organically. I just want to understand what you mean by staffing issues. Thank you.
Yeah, no, you're correct. I should have said this before. I was in a meeting previously on Blake Lane and had to address this also. I don't know why this isn't out there really in the media and stuff like that, but Fairfax County, you know, I've been a cop for Fairfax County 13 years, but I've been a police officer other jurisdictions for 21 years. This past couple years throughout the nation has been rough on law enforcement, right? Everyone knows that. It's been in the media and stuff like that. Every department right now is having staffing problems. Fairfax County, and I know this isn't out there, but I just say it because it's the truth. We are down 200 officers right now. It's not 10 or 15. The entire department is down 200 officers. Why is that? I can't explain fully except for the environment. People are leaving. We've got young kids who in the first 5 years are just leaving. They're just like, nope, I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to deal with, being a police officer. We've got senior officers rolling out at 20 instead of waiting for 25 because they're fed up of the environment that law enforcement's been having. Guys that are hitting 25 aren't staying anymore. Like some guys would stay a little longer. They're just leaving. As soon as they hit 25, they're leaving. So we are hiring, but in the past, I'll say like maybe 3 years ago, pre-pandemic and stuff, pre-2020, right? 2020 is where it kind of went downhill for law enforcement. We were having 1,000 applicants at a time, 1,000. We're only having a few hundred now, and we can only pick people who can qualify, right? Who can pass the background checks, don't have criminal histories and stuff like that, pass the psych exams. I've talked to some of our hiring officers, I forget whatever you call them, but they're saying it's just so hard to get officers, new kids in here to get on the academy. I'm a driver instructor, so I see some of the new kids coming through, and academies used to be 50, 60 officers deep. We're like 25 to 30 now. And we're trying to push them out as fast as we can, but as fast as 30 officers get released, 40. Can you still hear me?
You cut
Yeah,
out
we have
those
you now.
last couple words, but yeah, I can hear you all right.
Officer Rochefort, are you there still? We can't hear you.
Why don't we just give it a
Yeah,
moment?
it looks like, yeah.
See if anybody else has any other comments. I think he was obviously saying that they're having issues hiring. And keeping up with staffing levels. So I think that was abundantly clear.
I think we lost him.
Yeah, we can move on, folks. That answered my question. I just wanted to get some clarity on that, and I don't know if he's the right person, or I know this is a transportation committee, but I would just express hope, I guess, that the other folks on Fairfax County government writ large that's on this call can kind of make sure that issue is front and center. I mean, this is there's other areas of the country that I would imagine it's tougher to find police officers to cover than Northern Virginia. I mean, come on, this is to me would be kind of a little easier recruiting grounds. And so I don't know if it's Supervisor Faust or who's in charge of that, but if we can start building the ranks back up, it seems like a lot of the enforcement, a lot of the, I don't want to say smaller issues would go away, but it would, I think, go a long way to answering some folks' concerns earlier in the call. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Michael. That's a good question. Okay, so we did have a number of questions, obviously, for FCPS, for WMATA. Unfortunately, they have not joined us, so I'll have to follow up with them after the meeting. Cheryl, you had another one for VDOT, and that was specifically related to the Haycock Road and Great Falls Street intersection, the lack of crosswalks there. We missing crosswalks on 2 of the legs of that intersection. And your question was, how do they see the proposed mitigation in the TIA affecting that intersection? What alterations would need to be made? The mitigation proposed, making some alterations to the left turn lanes from Haycock onto Great Falls Street. So you were looking for VDOT's input on that.
Right, and Tim, just again to clarify for the rest of the AG, Mark Kiefer and I had several rather lengthy exchanges with VDOT personnel after one of the last meetings where VDOT was present. And I also point out that in the survey, the quadrant that includes the Great Falls Haycock intersection, I believe, was the top priority or the second ranked priority of respondents. So there's an enormous amount of interest in that intersection. So we really are anxious to hear what VDOT has to say. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to start chiming in, and then perhaps Sid can join. Perhaps Cheryl, your information is more up to date than mine. I do not have anything more to offer than the April 4th email that you received from our traffic studies group, non-VU, that basically there are three issues as I understand it. There is the they already promised to install the R10-15 sign, if the sign is not already installed, but they are in the process of installing it, which is the turning vehicle yield to pedestrians. They're going to install that anytime if they haven't installed already. Enforcement is not an issue, is an issue because of the explanation that non-VU provided to his email to you, that they spoke with the police officers and they didn't think that they are able to enforce this. Perhaps with including the sign itself, it would help vehicles yield to pedestrians at those crosswalks. The other issue at this intersection was the timing. They have our traffic engineering studies team have forwarded your request to the signal ops, and they are examining various timing and phasing scenarios for the signal to make it any better. They're working on that. I'm going to have to follow up with them to find out where exactly it is. Now, in terms of changing the lane configuration that the TIA came up with, having a separate left instead of a shared through left, this is one of those projects that has to be funded and prioritized. It has to be engineered and it has to be examined and studied. Maybe the right-of-way is there, perhaps right-of-way acquisition. We have to think about those. The proper transition, the proper taper length, and the proper storage length should be there. What the study came up with is a planning level type solution that doesn't take into account any of the detail engineering, perhaps right-of-way acquisition, the taper lengths, and all that into account. So once once a request has been made through the supervisor's office to the county, and then to VDOT Richmond office, then we'd be able to look at this in more detail. This particular request is not something that we can go ahead and implement easily. It has to be funded, it has to be prioritized, it has to be engineered. Some of the requests are easy enough. Putting a crosswalk there, yeah, we can do it in-house, look at it real quick and implement it immediately. But changing the lane configuration at an intersection, especially where right-of-way acquisition might be involved, takes more time and and more study, perhaps, to implement those. But this is where we stand now. I would suggest changing for the lane configuration. The process is that the supervisor office make a request through the county to VDOT Richmond office. And then the project gets funded through preliminary engineering and prioritized. There are probably hundreds of projects that VDOT is currently working on, and every year they get prioritized. Maybe go down the list or what. But I'll let Sim chime in more. He might be.
Well, this is a very good question. Actually, I have been driven on this intersection many times when I taken my daughter to soccer practice. So, and I found myself be strangled on this intersection in 2 cycles. Sometimes, maybe more than that. So I think the VDOT is on a ball on this intersection. I know that they have many correspondence with you, but one of the things is that making an exclusive left and making a right and through is little troublesome, because if you can make it exclusive left, which may work probably another year, but the right turners is going to come back and also complaining about it because they have to go through. They don't want to stuck into the right turns, or any right turners would be stuck behind the through for another 3 minutes. I think the land configuration needs to be addressed exclusive left, through, and exclusive right. And that way is a project. So what we have done in the past, there's a way Alex explained, that's one and long way. There's another way, very short way, which is Jane Edmondson. I have done some project when I was in traffic engineering, that you create a proper condition for developer. And I'm sorry to say that one too, that you create a proper condition to a developer to address this issue. Of course, they're not going to go beyond their project limit and do it, but they can set it up some escrow amount in there, and which is the part of the TIA, and they're supposed to be addressing that because it is creating a problem because of the project, and project is the one triggering this off-site improvements. They will not go back and do those improvements about a half a mile away. Of course, they can just set it up escrow account, fund it in there, and then let the VDOT to create the funding and utilize that funding source to do this implementation. And Jen has done this one many on other projects. We have built intersections of the site by escrow accounts. So, I mean, this is another way to address on this one. Sorry for the long detail on that.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Sid, because that's exactly the point. We wouldn't even be having this discussion tonight if we weren't having the development taking place from the Falls Church City corner of Haycock and Route 7 all the way up to the overpass with I-66 on Haycock Road. So thank you for being as direct and forthcoming with your answer. It's actually quite refreshing. Thank you.
Okay. We had a couple more questions from Mark. One was to provide a list of updates on nearby projects. I can actually provide that to him via email. I've gone over some of those at previous meetings. I want to open it back up to both the AG and the public. We have, a couple members of the TG on tonight. I said I can follow up with some of the others that are absent, but if anybody else has any questions for those who are present, if you want to go ahead and ask those now, and after that we can move on to the presentation. And if there are no further questions, Paul Rothstein, go ahead.
Hold on, Tim. Okay, Paul, you can unmute yourself. And do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to...
Okay, can you?
Yep, we got you.
Is Virginia Tech here?
Don't see them.
We do have Reg Verray on from Virginia Tech from the Smart Cities application.
Oh, okay, that's great. I do have a question, and it's actually it relates to the Virginia Tech press release about what's going on at the Smart Construction Research Center, and it talks about Virginia being part of the smart construction, but then it also has a statement: the university will continue to maintain space at the Northern Virginia Center until 2024, when the first academic building at the Innovation Campus, which is in Alexandria, is expected to open. So my question is, after 2024, is Virginia Tech there as part of the Smart Construction Center, or are they not?
That's still being hashed out as we speak. So the city, Virginia Tech, and HIT, a developer there, are in active discussion and negotiation on the details. From what I'm hearing back from Virginia Tech proper, is that we're about 6 weeks away from having to share anything publicly. So once that becomes publicly available and okay, I'd be more than happy to follow up on those particular details with you all.
So it's possible that Virginia Tech will have no presence at that site after 2024?
There's still a potential. One is that Smart Construction Center of Excellence in partnership with HIT, as well in some of the buildings, but a lot of those details are still being hashed out, and how large of a presence we still maintain. So that's still being actively discussed with the stakeholders.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Okay, do we have any more questions for the technical group before we move on? Oh, Cheryl, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. You know, the issue of what is happening at the property that we've all been referring to as VTech for the last couple of years is kind of weighing heavily on our community. And, you know, it's always been the highest density of the Fairfax County two projects, the WMATA and this project. And so I'm just wondering, we have a TIA paid for by the developers that we've used and you guys have relied on quite a bit, but just listening to the last speaker talk about the uncertainty, when are we going to get a TIA for that particular plot? Is it going to be after our work is completed? Because again, the reason why we're meeting is because of the additional traffic that is going to be generated by these projects and the impact that they are having on an already difficult active transportation situation. So I don't know if Mike and Tim or Bob, you can answer this question, but I think we really do need to know what's happening with that 7 acres, which I believe is actually owned by Falls Church City, even though it's Fairfax County property included in Fairfax County. So how are you addressing that in the county, and how are you going to get that information to us, even though I know there's pressure to wrap up this AG quickly?
Sure. So they, like WMATA has done now in the rezoning process, would need to submit a TIA, the traffic analysis. So the one that was done for the plan amendment, that assumed development with Virginia Tech and with the WMATA property. And that's how we kind of got to the level of traffic being generated from that. And again, they would need to reassess that as part of rezoning. So WMATA is doing a traffic impact analysis now. That's being reviewed at this moment. And if Virginia Tech is going to submit an application, they would also need to submit a traffic impact analysis. So we would know those impacts before then.
Cheryl, this is Ben, and maybe just to kind of clarify what the TIA is. The TIA that was done for the comp plan amendment sets kind of a ceiling on the maximum development level that we would see out on those two sites, and then what spins off from that in terms of impacts. In this case, obviously, our focus has been on traffic. So we know that from that TIA. The TIA that would be submitted as part of a rezoning application is based on kind of the more refined development numbers that the developers would propose. So we have the ceiling. So I think if, to the extent that, you know, the concern is about traffic generation, I would refer you to the TIA that was done as part of the plan amendment.
Well, Ben, thank you for that. But you know, if the usage is going to change dramatically, you know, a large part of that, as I understood it, was traffic that would be generated because we'd have a lot of institutional use and people who would be going on Haycock Road and using the magic grid of streets to get there off of Route 7. But if it's going to morph into just a construction headquarters and some residential units, that might actually be better for the community if it lessens the traffic. And so if you're saying these are the maximums, okay, but I think it's something that the community needs to know. And I'm afraid that we're not going to get to know that until after our AG work is concluded. But anyway, thanks for your explanation.
Sure, and like I said, the max is what is shown in the TIA. And again, there will be additional refinement for what gets submitted as part of the rezoning, but we're not going to get any additional development beyond what was evaluated as part of the comp plan. So I would look at it's either going to be the same or less.
Okay, great. I think that does it for the technical group Q&A. So really appreciate those of you that joined, and then again, I'll follow up with the others on some of the questions that were sent in. So thanks a lot. If you want to hang on and check out the community survey results as we go through those slides, feel free to stay on with us. So if we could pull the slides back up. All right, great, thank you. We can go to the next one. There we go, perfect. So a little recap of the survey. We had the community survey, which we discussed in our last AG meeting. That was open from May 10th to June 13th. We had extended that. Originally, we were going to close it at the end of May, but we had sent a series of postcards out. They didn't reach all the intended recipients, so we sent another round of postcards out and then extended the survey deadline by about 2 weeks. The result of that is we got 441 submissions, so a fairly decent number of people took the survey, which, as we all know from working on it, was rather lengthy. But folks took time out of their day to write in their comments and submit the surveys, so that was great. And from that, we've got some information, not just on the recommendations, but some demographic information and kind of an idea of where these survey submissions came from. So 99% of the people that took the survey live within the 2-mile study area. Again, that's encompassing both the pedestrian 1-mile zone and then the bike 2-mile shed. 70%, if you can see the pie graph on the bottom left, currently use the Metro Rail. And you can see the larger pie graph on the right. I hope you guys like pie because there's a lot of these. There's a pretty good mix of modes getting to the Metro. You see 43% drive, 45% walk, and then there's sort of a mixture as well. Some people were able to write in where we said other, please specify that they take a couple different modes. Some people also commented that they would take Metro if it was more reliable. They would take it if we had better facilities to get them there. So sort of similar comments to what we've heard at the community meetings from folks. But interesting to see in this case the makeup of people that commute to Metro. There's also pretty good representation from all quadrants. So you can see the middle pie chart. We're looking at the 1-mile radius from the Metro station. 11% do not live within the 1-mile zone, but you can see from the southwest, northwest, northeast, southeast quadrants, a pretty good mix of folks taking the survey. It's not really heavily slated one way or the other. We can go to the next slide, which shows a little bit about the demographics, the type of people who are taking our survey. Is again a good split of male versus female taking the survey. Age group, we had probably a bit surprising for us, seeing that almost half were within the 31 to 50 age group. Household income, race or ethnicity, these sort of line up with what we've looked at in the community profile for this area. So again, a pretty good representation and mostly what we expected to see from those who took the survey. Go to the next slide. So the next few slides, I'm going to go over the questions pertaining to the recommendations, and I'll use the first one as an example here. We asked folks to rank the improvements generally that they felt could enhance active transportation. So pedestrian infrastructure in general, improving sidewalks, adding benches. The second selection, improving roadway crossings, so visibility at the crosswalk, shorter crossing distance. So you can see in this table, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then below that, you have for pedestrian infrastructure, 240 under 1, 111 under 2. So you had 240 people put pedestrian infrastructure as their first priority. And you can kind of go on down the line. That gives you a total number of people that voted for that particular improvement. And you get a score out of that that's weighted based on where they put their specific priorities for each of these. And so from that, we get a score, and then we can kind of order these in order of top priority to lowest priority. And you can see that here. So pedestrian infrastructure, I think we kind of expected that to be number 1. Improved roadway crossings. We've mentioned a lot of different recommendations pertaining to, using rectangular rapid flashing beacons and high visibility crosswalks. That's been a very big component of this study. So that's their number 2 priority. If you go to the next question, these are some of the other kind of more outside the box and in some cases options that we've looked at. Slow streets we talked about, looking at a slow streets pilot program. That was the most popular additional recommendation. People like to see maintenance agreement with the developers to sort of enhance the gateways into the development through landscaping and regular upkeep. Was a second most popular, and then adding street trees and additional landscaping along the major pedestrian routes. So definitely, adding street trees and the like was another popular recommendation from folks. So now to get into the meat of it, we'll start looking at the quadrants. And we're going to go through these. I'll get to the end of the presentation, and then I'd like to go back through them so we can kind of talk about how the advisory group wants to prioritize these. So you can see at the top, this was the question: rank the recommendations in the southwest quadrant. And I can't remember who it was. It might have been Sonia who recommended, or Jeremy, that we allow respondents to skip questions. Not everybody's going to want to go through the whole survey. I think on average it took people about 16 minutes, which is a fair amount of time to dedicate to a survey. So a lot of folks skip the quadrants where they didn't live, and I think that can kind of show here. You can see how many people skipped the question, how many answered it. And so it's might be a little hard to make out, but you can see the bold wording is where the advisory group had sort of landed when I asked you all to submit me your initial priorities for this quadrant. So add high visibility crosswalks at all interchanges, interchange ramps along Leesburg Pike, construct sidewalk along the north side of Shreve Road from Chestnut Street to Gordon's, construct sidewalks along Gordon's Road and Chestnut Street. Those were the recommendations that the advisory group had really promoted as being priorities. In the blue, the shaded 1, 2, and 3, you can see where the community landed. So top priority, improve the pathway along Leesburg Pike from Idlewood Road to Falls Church Drive. That's indicated with the yellow number 1 marker. Second priority from the community, add high visibility crosswalks. That aligns with what the AG has indicated as a priority, and that's indicated on the map as number 3. And then crossing of Leesburg Pike at Shreve Road and Haycock Road indicated with marker number 8. And I believe we have a question, Cheryl. Did you need a clarification?
Yeah, Tim, thank you. This is going to apply to all of the slides that come after this one. But is there a way that you guys can disaggregate the responses from, in this case, this quadrant? Because you keep saying the community, but you had 440 people answer this, of which maybe 110 live in this community. And I'd really like to see how the specific communities, rather than those of us who drive through that community, responded to the rank orders. Is that possible for you guys to disaggregate that a bit further for us?
It's not. It's an anonymous survey. I think the benefit of not doing that too is, you have people that walk and bike through these areas. we have a big study area. It's, you know, it's not just this 1 mile, it's the 2 miles. So I think getting feedback from people that might not necessarily live in this quadrant, but maybe they work around here or still commute through here, is still helpful. I think it's still valid.
Well, I will just say I've gotten a number of people from my general area, which of course is not this area, who are commenting on why certain things, or asking why certain things that were priority for people in our area are so low ranked, when people who may not live here in our section are commenting on, let's say, the Great Falls Haycock intersection, which, by the way, as you know, has been one of my priorities. But I think this is one of the shortcomings of this survey, is that the very specific communities, we can't see what I understand your explanation, but I think it's a shortcoming. Excuse the interruption. Thanks.
Oh, no problem. But that raises a good point. I mean, you know, we mentioned earlier on that this was just going to be a tool, and I'll get to this at the end of the slideshow. But this is one tool to help the advisory group make their decision. You could just simply say, okay, the community voted, these are the top 3 priorities. Let's go with that. I think, though, that most of you are probably going to want to consider that with all the other data that's been provided. You know, looking at pedestrian level of comfort, for example, bicycle level of traffic stress, the feedback you've got from individual neighbors, and your expertise in living here, of course, is obviously going to play into your decision on what actually gets prioritized. So, you know, having this in the report, you know, we can show where the community landed. It doesn't have to line up with where the AG ends up ultimately going. And I think we just need to make sure that, you know, whatever that decision is, there's, you know, a little bit of reason behind it. You know, we've considered these recommendations, we've considered the results of the survey, we've considered the conditions as we've experienced them, and this is why we're putting these as our top 3 or however many we choose.
And Cheryl, I'm not sure if this helps or not, and I know that you probably heard Tim indicate it earlier, but there are people who skipped certain sections, and we don't necessarily know why, but I think from, you know, my understanding from talking to some folks, if they didn't know the quadrant well enough, they would skip it. So it's not to say that you aren't speaking with, you know, kind of a representative sample of your community, but I think this should be a tool that, you know, that the AG focuses on closely as they're evaluating, you know, their recommendations.
Thank you, Ben. I'll hold off on other comments till Tim finishes. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So, move on to the next one here. So we can see sort of similar, 351 answered, 90 skips, a few more skips this one. This is, again, looking at the northwest quadrant. And for the most part, the community aligned with what the AG saw as being priority projects here. So creating the accessible pedestrian route to the Metro Rail station from Idlewood Road. I know that one we kind of have mixed opinions on among AG members, so we'll definitely want to talk about that, given the feasibility study that was done in the past on that connection, and obviously the high cost of that one potentially. But adding high visibility crosswalks at the Pima Drive Leesburg Pike intersection, that's indicated at number 4 on the map. That was another high priority for folks in the community. And then where we differed, at least with the AG and the people that took the survey, you know, the AG had thought that constructing sidewalk along Red Road to Idlewood Road, so kind of you know, going beyond the TPP recommendation for the pedestrian bridge at Red Road and implementing some sidewalk along that stretch of roadway, was another one highly favored by the AG, but the community saw the best, probably the best recommendation for this area as installing an accessible route to Lemon Road Elementary School from Pima Drive. Now, that being said, you know, the route that is there, indicated at number 1 on the map, is a stairway, so that's obviously not accessible. So we'd have to look at whether or not we could make an accessible route at that location, or whether the proposed project in the TPP program to make that bridge over Red Road could provide that route for pedestrians. So that's something that we should talk about. Mira, I know you probably have some thoughts on that one, so we can come back to this one and kind of talk through these recommendations and see where we think we should land on those. Okay, we can go to the next one. Okay, now we're looking at the northeast quadrant. Again, Cheryl, as you mentioned, not too surprising, but the Great Falls Street and Haycock Road intersection is the top priority for the community, which aligns with what the advisory group has really been focused in on. So that's good. Other problems that the community has seen is, not having access across Great Falls Street. So you can see that here reflected in their 2 and 3 selections. See a sidewalk on the east side of Great Falls Street, north of Hutchison Street, and then a mid-block crossing over to the Pima Run Stream Valley Park, indicated at number 1 on the map. The AG had also mentioned looking at improving the intersection of Westmoreland Street and Haycock Road, and then including a mid-block crossing with an RFB at Hutchison Street over Great Falls Street. Oh, Michael, did you have a question?
I didn't want to slow your momentum. Are you trying to get through all of this and then we kind of take questions on individual slides?
Yeah, so I was going to get through the presentation, then we're going to go back through and talk about where we think we should land on priorities. We're not going to decide anything tonight, but kind of get a sense of where we want to take this.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Okay, we can go to the last quadrant. Again, no surprise to anybody that improving the pathway from Great Falls Street to the Metro Access Road along Haycock Road is the number 1 priority. And surrounding that improvement, constructing sidewalk along Turner Avenue, kind of connecting to what would be that improved trail, and then adding the crosswalk, high visibility crosswalk over Turner Avenue along Haycock Road was another priority. The AG had mentioned that Mount Daniel Drive, adding sidewalk along that stretch, as indicated on the map as number 6, was a priority. So we'll have to talk about and discuss whether or not we want to include that in the overall priority list, or whether we want to kind of stick with what the community has, kind of weigh those options. But again, you can see in this one, 345 answered this question, 96 skipped. So we have no way of telling for sure why folks skipped it, but that's kind of our best take, is that people answered the questions that pertain to where they live or work or like to travel through. You can go to the next slide. And these were where the community ranked on bicycle improvements in the 2-mile walkshed. And again, not too surprising here that they're proximate to the metro station. So we have improving Haycock Road from Westmoreland Street to the City of Falls Church boundary line, Shreve Road from the W&OD Trail to Leesburg Pike, and then Leesburg Pike from Pimmet Drive to Falls Church Drive. Those are where folks think that we should really focus our efforts on improving infrastructure for cyclists and getting them to the metro station. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So I mentioned, this is a tool. I think, it shouldn't obviously be ignored. I think 441 people submitting their recommendations and their comments with the survey is something that we should take a look at closely and consider as the AG sets their list of priorities. But we've gone over a number of different ways of looking at priorities, and we've got a list of about 45 recommendations. So other things to consider are listed here. Ease of implementation. Obviously, some of these are easier to implement, cheaper to implement than others. We're going to talk about funding at our next meeting, which I'll get to at the end of the presentation. But that'll certainly play a part in decision making. funding a high visibility crosswalk, for example, is going to be drastically different than putting in a trail from Idlewood Road to the metro station. You know, we went over the active Fairfax barriers and destinations map, bicycle level traffic stress, and the scores on the roadways within the study area, pedestrian level of comfort. We've looked at the traffic through the average daily traffic numbers we've got from VDOT on area roadways. So the advisory group may want to consider that. Do we focus the priorities along those major roads like Shreve Road, Haycock Road, Great Falls, Leesburg, Pike? You know, we've got a little bit of crash data that I had sent out a couple months ago, 5-year crash history from VDOT. A host of other ways you could kind of slice this up. So it's really going to be up to the advisory group, and that's what I'd like to discuss with you all tonight, on how you want to apply these tools and approaches to setting these priorities. Obviously, we're missing a few folks tonight, so we're not going to decide anything now. I do want to get a sense of where people think we should head with setting these initial priorities, because again, another component of this study is developing planning level cost estimates. We're not going to be able to do that for all 45 recommendations, but we can certainly do that for 3 per quadrant, 4 if that's what we end up going with. And then given that information, if we need to tweak the priorities and the way that they're listed, again, that may play a factor. But again, it's up to the AG. So I want to open it up for discussion and see where you all think you'd like to see these priorities land. If we can go back, we do have a couple more slides, but we'll go back to the first quadrant. I know Jeremy, I think, is not on. Rob told me he would be out today. So I'm not sure we'll have anybody to comment. Bruce, you can go ahead.
I just have a question. What's the difference between the first ranked project and the second ranked project?
In terms of how many people voted, or?
No, I mean, the description for the first ranked project is improved pathway, which is somewhat vague. The description for the second ranked project is highly specific, but it covers the same area as the first ranked project. So I mean, it seems to me that the first ranked project and the second ranked project cover the same length. Aren't those really overlapping?
They do in a sense, and so if we want to combine those, I think that's fine. I think if the AG thinks that we should combine those recommendations, if improving the pathway means not only widening the sidewalk, and implementing high visibility crosswalks at the interchange locations, I think that's fine. But that's certainly, the focus is definitely on Route 7 from the results we're seeing.
Cheryl?
That makes sense to me. I'll just toss that out for others.
Yeah, I had a similar question, and of course it applies to all of the quadrants. Is it possible to see the numerical score? I mean, how big of a difference is there between on any of these, let's say 2 and 3 or 4 and 3? You showed us some numerics on some other areas, and I'm just wondering, what is the difference between 1 and 2 or 1 and 5 on these? If that's possible to show us, like you had 4 point something on one of the other charts. I think it would make it a little bit clearer if like 3, 4, 5, and 6 are all within 1/10 of a point. It might help for us to understand. But then that gets back to my concern about us not really knowing what the individual communities feel most strongly about. So is it possible to see that kind of numeric data that you had somewhere else on the charts?
Sure. Yeah, I didn't want to bog down with too much detail these tables, but yeah, I can send out updated tables with the number of folks that voted for each of these and where their priorities are to the AG after this meeting. You know, because I think we're going to have to decide some of this via email, and I'll talk about this at the end. But obviously, we're kind of getting into summer. People are taking time off, so we're going to need to probably come back after some time for our next AG meeting, and between now and then, we'll need to try to converse via email to figure out, you know, which of these should be on the list that we kind of develop those cost estimates for, so we can have those prepared for our next meeting.
Bruce, did you have any more comments on this quadrant?
No.
Okay. Cheryl,
Okay.
did you have any more comments on this quadrant?
Yeah, I think we can move on to the next one since our AG reps from this quadrant aren't on. I'm sure they'll have some things to say about this one. Okay, so now we're on the Northwest. Any discussion on this from the AG? Go ahead, Cheryl.
Yeah, one of the things that a number of people in my community, my neighborhood, commented on after listening to one of the other meetings was this discussion and this inclusion of the pedestrian route to the Metro Rail station that would somehow either have to go through the Metro Yard or go over the Metro Yard. And it just seems that we do a disservice to the community when we even include this as a possibility. This isn't really realistic. It's not going to happen. I imagine WMATA would bring in all sorts of other federal agencies to look at the security of doing this. So I'm wondering why we included things that we knew weren't possible. And that also includes some things in our area where we already know VDOT has vetoed certain things over the years. So I think we should have had a better discussion about some of the items that were included in the study, and certainly, or the survey. Certainly this access route to the metro station is one of those things. So I am not alone in sharing this concern that this was even included.
Sure, and I've heard from a couple of folks that have the same sentiment there, and I think I wouldn't classify it as impossible. It certainly would be very challenging, very costly. I wanted to include it because a number of AG members had said that they saw this as a priority. Folks in community meetings had said they wanted to see this connection. But at the end of the day, if the AG, through attending these meetings and having these discussions, feels that this is not something that should be put forward as a priority, that's up to you all to put that forward. I don't think it would be fair to not include it, since we've heard from folks that they'd want to see that happen, and it is in our comprehensive plan as showing that connection. I don't disagree that it would be very costly, very tough to get through, and WMATA has stated that too. So that's just something to consider as we kind of weigh the priorities that the AG is going to be recommending. Bruce, did you have a comment on this one as well? Oh, you're muted.
In my opinion, this item illustrates why we need to have cost estimates reasonably soon. I can understand why this might sound like an attractive idea to someone who's unfamiliar with the WMATA property, but this project actually would be very costly and would, due to its large costs, preempt more beneficial improvements, smaller scale improvements elsewhere. So I do hope we will have cost estimates in the reasonably near future.
Sure, and a comment on that, again, as I mentioned, we're not going to have cost estimates for all 45 of these. It's a big lift for one, and we wouldn't have it prepared in time for this study to wrap up. However, our capital projects section is updating a spreadsheet that kind of helps us determine, a reasonable estimate for costs for these projects. And the goal is to have those prepared for the next AG meeting. And we're looking to kind of push that out past the summer, past when people are taking their vacations. So, in our discussion today and our discussion via email over the coming weeks and month, I do want to land on, where the AG would like to see us prepare these estimates, whether it's, 3 recommendations per quadrant, 4 in some, whatever the number is, but, try to keep it at a reasonable level. I don't want cost being the number one factor determining where you all put your emphasis and prioritizing these. But you do make a good point that it should kind of play into where these are. And we've heard from our folks that, generally speaking, this pedestrian route would probably be within the tens of millions of dollars, just to give an idea. Jane, you had something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to throw out that the AG might want to consider, as they pick 3 or 4, what might be short-term and what would be long-term. Because as you said, Tim, putting up a rapid flash beacon is going to be much cheaper than doing a mile of sidewalk. A mile of sidewalk, it's hard to believe, but it would be over $1 million. So it may be that while there may be 4 really wonderful long-term projects that people want in a quadrant, that they may want to think about, well, what are some of the short-term things that may be a little lower on the list, but at least we'll get them in a reasonable time, and perhaps more projects if we don't pick the high price ones.
Right, that's a good point to make. Mira, you're up next.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment about including it in the survey. I do think it was good to include it to kind of get where the community sits on it. I know, like we said, we can't determine who answered what and, if they live in this quadrant or not. But I think if you said you could break it down and tell us some more numbers on who voted for what, would be helpful. And just to show that there is interest in that. Yes, I do know there's great negative, people have so many negatives to it, and some positives, but I think it kind of lends itself to the narrative that has been for 10 years that we don't want it. That this survey kind of indicates that people do. I know in my section of the neighborhood, there are several families that do want this pedestrian route. And yes, it is perhaps a long-term goal. And to Jane's point, to kind of think about that, to do the ones that are quicker, the high visibility and the shorter crosswalks as the priority for this AG group, but I do appreciate it being included.
Yeah, that's a good comment. And again, going with what both you and Jane said, we can categorize these in a number of ways. It's really up to you all on how you want to do that. But we could say these are our top priorities. These are our short-term priorities. These are our long-term priorities. Our more idealistic, 10+ year recommendations. Again, it's really up to you all, kind of taking the tools and different approaches and determining where you want to go with it. Do we have another? Sorry, do we have another hand up?
No, I think we're good. Jane, is your hand up from before?
Okay. I think we can move on to the next one. Okay, and again, number one priority aligns with what we've discussed here at the AG, but a little bit of difference in the other two recommendations. So any comments on this one? Agree, disagree with how the community's voted here?
Pike?
Yeah, I disagree, I guess. I mean, to me, first off, I guess if you look to the far right, again, we talked about this, that it looks like kind of that Kirby Court. I thought there was going to be some crosswalk kind of between Kirby Road and Haycock Road, kind of smack in between, that would service a ton of those townhomes and houses on the right-hand side of Westmoreland to get to either Longfellow and or Haycock. To me, I mean, that would serve a far better purpose, putting a crosswalk there, than this number one yellow circle go into this Pimmet Park, or Pimmet Run Stream Valley Park. I've frankly driven by that numerous times. I've rarely seen people there. I don't know how many people are walking around there, but to think that is a higher priority than anything around the school or the Haycock Road, Great Falls kind of corridor. I mean, look how far away it is from the metro development itself. Like, to be honest, I don't even know why this was among the rankings, let alone how it finished third.
Yeah, I mean, it was a surprising one. It was on, so it came out of the active Fairfax Bears access map. That's why we included on this. But yeah, that was a surprising one to see kind of towards the top. The mid-block crossing that you mentioned, I think you were saying near Kirby Court. That's a current TPP project, so that's why that's not on this list. But yeah, you're right.
Well,
you would think that.
I think we talked about that though, and maybe Cheryl might know. Like, that was years ago. Like, I guess when we're talking short-term versus long-term projects, I mean, I'm kind of new to this process, but if you're saying that's kind of in process, it seems like that's been in process for a number of years. Talking about a crosswalk crossing, 20 feet or something like that. So that's a little discouraging that something like that can't be done in a matter of some weeks or whatever. And then I would just say, getting rid of this Pimmet Run Stream Park and bumping up number 6, which again is the crux of this super busy area of Haycock and Westmoreland. I agree with the number 1 ranked thing, anything along Haycock and Great Falls. Just again, looking at the number of people and usage and everything, and I would just put number 6 as number 2 probably, and then bump number 2 to 3. The Great Falls Hutchinson, that does a mid crosswalk or something across those streets would access, I guess, the left-hand side of a lot of those subdivisions or neighborhoods. But again, this Pimmet Run Stream Valley Park to me needs to get axed in favor of number 6. I mean, there's so much traffic and there's a lot of speeding going on around Haycock Elementary School. And again, to think that, again, I'm not demeaning people's access to a park, but that's just not realistic for 9 or 10 months of the school year, twice a day. The number of people accessing the street to cross over the park, which may be more popular on the weekends, I get, but if we're talking bang for our buck and what would affect the most people and frankly protect kids and be the most safe, it's a no-brainer that number 6 to me is elevated over number whatever 3 ranking number 1 on the map.
Yeah, I think that's
thanks.
Sure. No, I think that's a fair justification for why you would consider that over the other one. Beth, you had a comment?
Yeah, hi, Beth Inetta from Fairfax County Park Authority. I think unfortunately, I think you guys the staff did number one a disservice. I think in the beginning I had mentioned that you probably should show the parks and the trail parks that are included in these study areas, and Pima Run Stream Valley Park is actually pretty popular. It also connects a very long range series of trails, which is what makes it very popular. And also at Idlewood Road, where it crosses the stream just to the left of the circle, the red circle, Fairfax County Park Authority has been asked to put on, and we did approve, a bridge project to connect over the stream. So there's already infrastructure being planned and funded for that Stream Valley connection. You can go all the way under the toll road and connect to the other neighborhood. So it does link neighborhoods, and it is a very highly used Stream Valley Park system that extends to many different neighborhoods, but it doesn't show that on this map because you don't see the park trails listed here. So I wouldn't sell it short just yet. It has a lot of popularity. We've funded in the recent bond project a project to make it even more accessible and to provide greater connectivity. So the only missing piece to it would be a mid-block crossing to then formally connect it. So.
Okay, thanks, Beth. Yeah, you're right. You did mention that, and we can certainly add those trails to the map. That's a good point. I had no idea that that was a popular destination, so that's good input. Cheryl, you had a comment?
Yeah, I generally agree with everything Michael said. But again, this goes back to my previous point about us not really knowing how many people from the community voted for these things versus the entire universe of the 400 voters, which, by the way, is only 10% of the residences that received the notification that the survey was live. And so, frankly, Tim, I don't think 400 out of 4,400 is actually a very good showing. But the discussion about a lot of these issues really needs VDOT input. And I know VDOT has looked at a number of these crosswalks over the years. VDOT has disapproved a number of these crosswalks over the years. And I think we do a disservice to the community, however we want to define community, as well as to ourselves if we don't have VDOT explaining why VDOT won't put crosswalks in certain areas. You know, I noticed that our Haycock-Casemont crosswalk, which is a very high priority for people in our area, comes in at number 7, and something that I imagine VDOT would have something to say about, you know, this Pima Run mid-block crosswalk. VDOT might have some opinions on it, but we don't have enough information to really make informed decisions. And to the extent that we don't have that information, this survey isn't the greatest tool, because it's a lot of stuff that's been sitting around for a very, very long time, and none of these things were particularly new. So my recommendation has been and will continue to be that we focus on the main access roads to the metro station, because we are talking about moving people to and from that metro station primarily. And these are also the main access points for a lot of the folks going to the schools. So I agree with Michael, and I understand what Beth is saying about the park being popular, but I also have some skepticism about mid-block crosswalks, especially in that area, if they aren't done with all of the bells and whistles. So I will stop there. Thank you.
Sure. I mean, I think to address the point of not knowing who answered the survey, I had no idea that that Pima Run even existed before this study. And so to me, it seems like if the folks that live in this area voted for that to be a top priority, it's because they know that's a popular destination, as Beth has explained.
But
And
Tim,
so maybe there's more.
I'm sorry, Tim, we don't know if people who lived in the area
Right, we
voted
don't
for
know.
that. It
We
could
don't
be
know.
that people looked at it and said, hey, that sounds like a great idea. people should have a crosswalk to get to the park. If I saw that, and frankly, if I see anything that talks about improving children's safety on a route to school, I'm going to high rank that, even though maybe specific community members may not think they need any improvements. So
Sure.
I think, people interpret this stuff. And I do think that you asked people to say what quadrant they lived in. I remember marking that box. So I don't understand why you can't disaggregate this information based upon the respondents from the specific areas. But if you say you can't do it, I'll accept that. But I think certain things sound attractive, especially to people who aren't in the area. And they may make sense to people who are in the area too. I don't know. It's just that the tool is not sophisticated enough, I guess, to capture these things that I'm asking for. But I think everything near a school should be a high priority.
Sure, and that's a fair point. My only point was going to be that, I had no idea this even could have been a priority. This was surprising to see number 1 on the map as a top priority for the community. And my only point in making that observation is that maybe this is something that the community wants to see, and so we should maybe look into that a little more. I'm not disagreeing that the focus should be more around schools and around connecting closer to the metro, but I don't know that it's necessarily something that should be totally dismissed. As Beth has mentioned, this is something that the community actually might really be interested in seeing. Again, this is just a tool. I want to keep stressing that. And if we don't agree that it's a very good one, we can agree to disagree, but it's up to the AG. You all are tasked with making the decisions on where these priorities are in the study area. So if you don't want to rely on what the community survey has told you, that's up to you. But I do think we should look into it and not totally dismiss it and consider it along with the other information that's been provided. Do we have another question?
No, I think we can move on to the final quadrant.
Okay. And so with this one, again, there's some overlap between the map and the southeast and the northeast. So most of the recommendations here, again, we're focused on where we've really been spending a lot of our time discussing, and that's along Haycock Road, approaching the metro station, and along Turner Avenue and crossing over Turner Avenue. So again, I think the AG is mostly in agreement with the community here. I know we had a couple of folks from the AG say that it's important to construct sidewalk on Mount Daniel Drive, and I believe the justification for that is you have a school within. It's actually a City of Falls Church school just north of that Mount Daniel Drive off of Highland Avenue. There's an access to the school there. So I think that was part of the justification for that recommendation. But that being said, any thoughts on where the community landed? Any disagreements? Anything that you think needs to be clarified? Open for discussion on this one. I see we have go ahead, Cheryl.
Yeah. Jane and Ben, Supervisor Faust has told me on numerous occasions that there was money at one time to construct a sidewalk along Turner Avenue up to Grayson Place, and that when the community was consulted about that sidewalk, they turned it down. Am I imagining that, or did Supervisor Faust not tell me that? But I believe he's told me that several times, and so I'm a bit surprised. Every time I see these sidewalks, I start thinking about Ingleside, Jane, and wondering just how much community support there is when you go door to door and ask people who live on the streets if they want those sidewalks. So if you could comment on that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, and I think your memory is correct. The Turner Avenue one, which I think was proposed before John took office, when it went out to the community, there was no support. And because of that, and for really the Connect McLean projects, which a tremendous number on Chesterbrook Road and Kirby Road have been completed. We're sort of in the final stages of about 10 projects. All of those, when they finally got funded, were after community input, and in many cases, going door to door, the Connect McLean folks went door to door to affected property owners and said, this is not a commitment, but would you at least entertain having a sidewalk in front of your house, which may require you giving an easement? And it was primarily because of the Turner Avenue, where you get a project, it gets funded, staff spends a lot of time, and then you go out to the community, and the people who have to give an easement are emphatically no against it. So that's sort of the background on Turner. Now, that's not to say that people who might be against a project staff can work and minimize impacts. And we often have people who initially don't want to give an easement, and we work very hard and we get it. But we really just don't want to pull a project out of the air and say, okay, here's $1 million to fund it, and you haven't had any input from the community.
Thank you, Jane.
Okay, any other comments on this one?
I don't see any, Tim.
Okay.
We have some public comment if you want.
Okay, so I did want to just go over the last couple of slides, and then, yeah, we can go to the public comment to wrap things up. All right, thanks. So here's where we're at. We're approaching July here. Our task now is to refine the recommendations, establish the list of priorities that the AG has identified. And again, we'll be working, FCDOT that is, we'll be working on the funding piece. So I should say the cost estimate piece, looking to see how much generally some of these projects might cost. So the priority projects that the AG selects. So, recognizing that, again, a lot of people are taking time off. It's going to take some time to develop these estimates and time to sort of hash out where the AG sees these priorities. I think we'll likely hold our next AG meeting sometime in early fall. So we'll give the group some time to deliberate. Again, we'll still be corresponding over email, trying to determine, again, what is the best approach given the tools that we've kind of looked at throughout the study. What's the best approach for identifying the priorities? We'll meet in the fall. We'll have the cost estimates prepared to see if those priorities need to be adjusted at all given that new information. And then after that, we'll meet again with the community. We'll show the community, this is where the survey, came in. These are the statistics from the survey. This is where people voted. This is how they voted. And this is where the AG landed with their priorities. We'll take feedback from the community at that meeting. We're going to do another round of postcards to publicize that third meeting, and we'll do 2 sessions. At some point, we'll need to talk about whether we want to do an in-person meeting versus a virtual. We've kind of done everything virtual now, but I'll be polling the group to see if you guys want to try to do an in-person meeting for one of the community meetings to see if more people will come out and comment. And then after that, we'll meet for what'll be our 7th AG meeting to sort of talk about the results of the community meeting, see if anything needs to be adjusted based on the feedback we got at those sessions. That's the path I kind of see going forward. I know when we started this project, the goal was to try to wrap this up by the end of the summer. We've pushed that out a little bit to early fall. Hopefully we can wrap it up in September, October. And I know we had planned to have 6 meetings, but I think a 7th might be necessary. Just to again make sure that we're setting the priorities where they should be, and again getting that community buy-in on that list with the 3rd meeting. So any initial thoughts on that? Of course, we don't have everybody here, but I'm going to be sending all this information in an email following the meeting. So feel free to email me or call me after the fact if you want to discuss any issues with the schedule. Bruce, go ahead. Oh, Bruce, you're muted.
On the prioritization, what we've seen is projects ranked in each quadrant. It's basically 1 through 10. Is the intent that rankings projects 1 through 10 in each quadrant, is that the product that's going to be presented to the public? Or are we going to have some groupings? For example, this group of projects is high priority. This group of projects is medium priority. The remaining projects are low priority or non-priority. Can you comment on that?
Sure. So it's going to be both. We're going to, at the 3rd community meeting, show the public the kind of the raw data from the survey. So this is how you all voted, or your neighbors voted, however you want to state that. But this is the outcome from the survey. Then we're going to say, given that outcome, in addition to the other tools that the advisory group has used, the other discussions that we've had throughout this process, this is where the advisory group has landed. And again, it's going to be up to you all how you want to categorize that. So if it's 3 priority projects per quadrant, or if you want to categorize, short-term versus long-term, high cost, low cost, there's different ways to look at this. But in doing that, again, it's important that the AG justifies, if there's a difference in, what the community voted for versus what the AG sees as a priority. Again, using those tools to sort of justify why you made that decision, or past discussions, why you think something is more of a priority than something else. Proximity to schools for one, proximity to metro. So again, I'll send out an email kind of going through again what we've used throughout the study to help identify where these recommendations are, and how to prioritize them. And we'll have some discussion via email and meet again, likely early September after the summer, to talk through that and decide more definitively where those priorities should be and how they should be grouped. Cheryl, you had a comment or question?
I do have a comment, and as I have indicated in the past, and as I'm going to indicate again tonight, I have deep reservations about what we're doing here, as do a number of members of my community, including a person who's lived in the area for over 50 years, who has looked at this very carefully and sadly says that this survey is not representative of the community at large, and that the requests that Bruce, Mark, and I have made about the I-66 overpass and specific requests for serious studies about the segments of the key roads in the area have largely been ignored for a survey that is putting little band-aids on issues that are really very important to the community's safety in light of the development that is going to take place along Haycock Road. And to that end, a number of people in my specific homeowners association and elsewhere agree with me that we would like to see Supervisor Palchik and Supervisor Faust get the funding from the Board of Supervisors to hire an independent contractor to do a thorough study of the requirements that we need to enhance pedestrian and bicycle safety in light of the development. And we'll keep raising it and we'll keep asking it and we will keep participating in these meetings. But a lot of people are not going to buy off on the assertion when the supervisors say the community was consulted, especially when we have a very poor response in the way we see it to this initial survey. So, and we also have, as we said, our outstanding issues of the studies that we really think are critically important to get people in and out of the WMATA area safely. So I really hate to throw a glass of cold water on everything, but this seems to be a result that it was confusing to the survey was confusing to people. One person called it a dumpster fire. Another person said it's a very weak tool. I know you guys have put a lot of effort into this, and I appreciate the fact that here you are giving us your time late at night, but this is really fairly disappointing to a lot of people in our general neighborhood. So I'm going to with the idea that we have deep concerns about how this entire process is being run. So thank you very much.
Okay, Ben, did you want to say something?
Yeah, Cheryl, I think I just wanted to mention that there is no such thing as just hiring an engineer to come in and do a study. There are a multitude of ways in which to implement a project. So you could have the engineer could say, yeah, you could get by with what you have now. You could do a 5-foot wide sidewalk. You could do an 8-foot wide sidewalk. You could do an on-road bike lane, off-road bike lane. So there's no one answer that you would get from a consultant. What we've attempted to do, and which is what a consultant would do also if they were hired, is seek input from the community, which is what we're doing through the AG and through the survey. So, I know you've mentioned hiring a consultant before, but this is the process that you would undertake using a consultant.
Thanks, Ben.
For the record, the Herndon Metro Rail study that was done, similar effort to this, they hired a consultant. I don't think they got nearly as many responses in their survey and through their outreach via a consultant. So I just think it would be more productive if we focus on what we actually want to do
I want to
rather
thank
than
you
redo.
I want to thank you for that, because when Supervisor Faust told me after the conclusion of the task force that he would be following what was done in Herndon and Tyson's, our community had an expectation, and that expectation is not being met. Other people may feel differently, but people in my general area are not impressed with the work that this AG is doing. And again, we had that really great conversation with VDOT about the I-66 overpass and what we might do. And I'm not even sure how that was captured in the survey. People didn't understand what this road diet reference was. I'm not even sure that road diet reference referred to trying to enhance that curb strip that passes as a sidewalk over I-66. So we have, you and I and a couple others, we can try and hash this out over the email over the summer. But we do have concerns and they're not being answered. So I want to go on the record and say it again, and I'll keep saying it because my community wants me to raise it. So I'm going to stop there and let others have a chance to chime in.
Okay, let's move on. So we have a few members from the public that wanted to ask a couple questions. Tim, are you okay with that?
Yep.
Okay. Stephanie Costelli, I'm going to enable your microphone and you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, am I unmuted now?
Yeah, yes, you are.
Okay, I just had a few observations. I'm Stephanie Costelli. I live in a Lemon Road Community Association neighborhood adjacent to the rail yard. And I was on the task force, which considered whether to amend the the comprehensive plan to permit this development to go forward. I have a few observations. One is that everyone who responded to the survey was asked to disclose in which quadrant they live. And I think your results showed that 11% didn't live in the quadrant or didn't identify. So I think that it is truly representative of who lives here. Second, in listening to the meeting tonight, it seems to me that everyone who has spoken about the survey results wants to disregard projects not where they live, but move up theirs in priority in their neighborhood, but disregard others and rank them lower. And the third thing is that Metro owes us, LRCA, access to the station because over decades they have deforced and uglified our community with their industrial infrastructure. So I think that the strong feelings about needing access from here are reflected in the ranking of that project of access to the metro. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. We appreciate it. Next up is Elizabeth Yu.
Diego Castillo hit a homer, 300.
Okay. That's great news. Elizabeth Yu, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, well, since you want the advisory group to explain why they may not agree with the top three that you have indicated for each quadrant, I think it would be very helpful if you did provide cost estimates for all of the projects, and it's understood that these would just be conceptual design costs, so it wouldn't have to be elaborate cost estimates. But some of the projects that may not have made it into the top three in each quadrant might be a lot cheaper than some of them that have made it into the top three. And I think it would be helpful to have some rough estimate of the cost for all of the projects that are in the survey, and not just, you know, a select 4 or 5 from each quadrant. And that would be more useful for the advisory group to have that information in trying to make, you know, a suggestion as what would be the top priorities, both short-term and long-term.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. We can take a look and see what is available. It does take a little bit of effort to be able to kind of generate those estimates, but again, you know, thinking about where they kind of fall, we might need to kind of figure out how we do a more higher level, like it's, you know, expensive or not expensive or something like that, and we can figure out what a cutoff is, but we'll take a look and see what we can do. All right. Next up is Paul Rothstein. Your microphone is enabled.
All right, thank you. I have some things to say. First of all, the comments about why you shouldn't use a consultant are just extraordinary. They are like literally unknowable to someone who has worked with good consultants. You set a goal for a consultant, and just because different consultants can come up with different conclusions doesn't mean that a good consultant can't come up with a good conclusion. Also, consultants have, the good ones, have a methodology that they can deal with that is more scientific and more disciplined than what we saw from this survey and this process. It's just, I mean, it's just absolutely extraordinary that I heard those comments about why you shouldn't use a consultant. This, you know, I'm just going to say the study was billed as community driven. It was not. The Fairfax County didn't spend a cent on this process, and it shows. And Cheryl Sim referred to the community person, and you can read what she said at tinyurl.com/active transportation problem. Judy Seif has lived in this area for 50 years, and she shows in clear language why this survey was unclear and unusable, and a consultant would not have had those problems. This is what's going on. The supervisors and bureaucrats have made up your minds, and you are circling the wagons. You will say that this process validates your predetermined decisions, and you will ram through the development at Metro and at the former Virginia Tech site with nothing near the remediations that there would be if the board dedicated adequate funds from the millions of tax dollars that these projects will generate. You don't want to admit it, but this is going to generate millions of dollars. And this process and this strategy will probably work until kids walking to school are killed at Great Falls and Haycock or at other places identified by the community, just as recently happened at Oakton High School. Your jargon and bland assurances and arguments about consultants can lull people into submission for now, but you cannot talk your way around dead children and other pedestrians. And at that point, the media, the community, and future election opponents of the supervisors can go to tinyurl.com/Faust Palchik McKay. That's one word, Faust Palchik McKay. See all the opportunities that the county missed and hold the people accountable who need to be held accountable. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Paul. All right. Next up is, let me see here. It's a phone number. It's 571-226-7108. I'm allowing your microphone, so you put your hand down. 571-226.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, hi. This is Robert Boggs. I'm sorry. I had my hand up a number of times, but apparently I'm hearing you only through my cell phone, and I guess that's a rather awkward connection. Anyway, I don't want to be seen as just piling on, but I've been wanting to say when we're looking at the southeastern quadrant, that's my quadrant, that the prioritization that came up from the mail-in ballots was substantially at variance with the prioritization of those of us on the AG and in consultation with our neighbors, people who actually have to walk to the metro and know the problems. And I, at the risk of sounding undemocratic, I think that turning everything into a plebiscite in which everyone within a 2-mile radius has an equal vote on everybody else's quadrant, I would agree with Cheryl. It just doesn't make any sense. Yes, the inputs from the survey are interesting. And yes, in a couple of occasions, they've highlighted areas that we might not have thought of. But I hope when we get right down to the serious business of prioritizing in terms of funding and so forth, that the people on the AG who are, if they're doing their job, are consulting with their neighbors, will be given a more weight than the votes of people who don't live in a particular quadrant and don't know what the challenges are of getting to the metro without getting run over and so forth. So just again, I think that there's such a thing as maybe an excess of democracy in these things. I think that it would have been more helpful if people in each quadrant would be identifiable, so we get a sense of what they see as the most important things. I would also take issue with one of our guests who said that each of us is trying to preempt the others or push the priorities of other quadrants down the list. I've seen that not at all, and it's certainly not my intention. At the end, we probably should prioritize overall each quadrant by the number of people who actually would be served by the project. But anyway, thank you for hearing me. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you, Robert. And we can go through the survey and then see what else is kind of there for kind of statistical purposes to be able to kind of pull some information out. We'll go back and look and see what else is available. So with that, I'm going to turn Adrian White, your microphone is enabled. You can unmute yourself. And I'll wait for you to kind of do it. And I'll also just remind everyone, the survey was, kind of a tool from the community to kind of give us a sense of how we're doing. Again, we were relying on the AG to be able to kind of go back and talk to your neighbors, come back and take a look at the survey results, talk to each other, kind of start to really kind of think about this. I think, as Tim pointed out before, it was helpful to have some of the insights because, you know, they helped us identify some things we might want to take a little bit look into. And if we bring some information back to the advisory group, and you're like, oh yeah, okay, that might make sense, or, you know what, really think we should focus around a particular area. We think that makes a lot of sense. All that is reasonable. So, you know, again, we're trying to make sure that the community, the AG's priorities are kind of put together in a way that helps you all kind of advance projects. Adrian White, your hand is still raised, and your microphone is enabled if you have any comment.
Mike,
Okay, I finally got it. Sorry, I've been clicking on that microphone since you first spoke to me. I have a question. Were we not told that several years ago, WMATA looked at the possibility of an aerial walkway from Idlewood Road to the station and totally ruled it out?
Not to my knowledge. They did a study with Tool Design. Tool Design put together a general idea of how much it would cost. And again, that was done years ago.
Yes.
And so I'm sure that has ballooned significantly. So again, I wouldn't rule it out completely. I wouldn't say it's impossible, as I've mentioned, but yeah, it's definitely one that is probably the most challenging to get completed out of all the recommendations.
And Tim, we have Stephen Segerling from WMATA on here, who, if he wants to address it, he can.
Sure. Yeah.
Stephen, I don't know if you're available, and if you want to try to address it. But we can always follow up.
We can follow up with him. Yep.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you. I would appreciate that, because my recollection is that, yeah, as you just said, there was a very high cost associated with it, but there were also safety issues of going over the metro maintenance yard. And I'm not sure that any alternative routes were studied. So I'd love to have someone from WMATA respond.
Adrian, this is Ben, and maybe I could try to shed a little bit of light on this, at least based on my experience and recollection. We've had two projects in the area related to the West Falls Church Metro Station. One is at the rail yard, and the other one was a substation that was constructed next to it. I believe that during both those projects, we did look at, in part, a connection through the rail yard. When with the rail yard special exception, I think that's the one you were referring to, where there was a really high cost for a project. What derailed it more than I think anything, frankly, was that there was a lot of opposition within the community for creating that connection. A few years later, when we did the power substation, sentiment shifted slightly for a desire for a connection, and we negotiated, I believe, a kind of a footpath around the rail yard. I think it's circuitous, but that's something that we'll look at. I think one of the things that I found interesting from the survey is that it looks like there's now even more support for a connection. And so I think that, in my mind, while maybe it's infeasible or maybe infeasible to build a connection, there's still that desire there. And, whether we do it as part of this project or looking forward, I think it's important to at least try to reserve the right to do a connection, or at least take it into account, as development occurs within that area. So we have tried not to use cost as a determining factor for whether or not something should be recommended. And so I think even if it's something that would, may be unlikely right now, it's still important to know that there's support for it.
Thank you, Ben. I know there's support for it. There's even support in Ellison Heights, Mount Daniel. Some of our members recognize the great need, but I do remember the instances you have mentioned, and it just struck me that it was not going to happen the way people would like to see it happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. All right. So that does it for our public piece of it, the meeting. Tim, is there anything you want to do to wrap up?
Hey, thanks, Mike. Yeah, so again, my email's up on the screen. Phone number is listed below. We'll get these slides posted as soon as we can and have the recording up on the website, hopefully by next week. Again, for the AG members, I'll be in contact with you all shortly via email and can send you that spreadsheet with the survey results, and then we can kind of talk about where we want to go next. We should definitely discuss how we want to do these cost estimates, whether we're okay with doing a general sort of estimate for, all of the recommendations, whether we want some more detail for the priority recommendations, and kind of how we want to handle our next steps. So I'll be in touch with you all shortly to talk about that and how we can get prepared for our next meeting. Again, thanks for the discussion this evening and appreciate everybody's time.